It's time for the biggest story of the day. This is What Made the Cut with JJ and Alex on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Call Trajan Wealth today, your local financial fiduciary, 801-899-7600, or visit their website at trajanwealth.com. If you need help with your financial planning, retirement, etc., they have your back and they can help you. Also, this show is brought to you by G2G Bars with all natural ingredients, no preservatives, and plenty of protein. G2G Bars are perfect for anyone who needs a tasty and nutritious boost. Ben Anderson joins us now. So much to get into. Ben, let's start with your reaction from what we just heard. This trade involving the Celtics, Hawks, and Nets, and what it might mean for the draft tomorrow night.
Yeah, it's just an interesting spot we're in the NBA right now because, you look pure value-wise, trading Kristaps Porzingis for George Niang in a second-round pick is terrible. But as you mentioned, coming in, they shave $180 million or whatever it is off their luxury tax bill. Team that with what they're saving with the Drew Holiday trade. It's just like, they're cutting $400-500 million off of their luxury tax. So it's crazy that that's where salaries are and that we're going to have to get used to the idea that sometimes teams just make trades like that without the idea of getting talent back. And then, of course, Brooklyn has 5 first-round picks. There's only 30 picks. They've got
what are they going to do with all of those?
Yeah, they've got 1 of every 6. And the problem is, 19 through 27, they have 4 picks in that spot or in that range. So they're obviously going to try and package some of those and either kick them down the road for future picks or package them to try and move up and get maybe in the lottery if they could. Or I think where it really ties in with the Jazz, can they move 8 and a combination of those picks to either jump up to 5, trade with the Jazz, or jump up to 4 if they felt like, hey, the Jazz are going to take Ace Bailey. We want him. He's on the board at 4. Let's go get him. That's where I think it does have some interest locally.
Well, I mean, if we can get back on Kristaps Porzingis, I'm still bewildered over here. But what is the allure with him right now? I was just talking to JJ and off the air. It's just like how many games he's played in the last 8 years and consistency. I'm just like, what are you going to assure to get out of this guy, especially during crunch time where you need pairing him with skinny Trae Young? I'm just like, what does Atlanta think that they're getting out of that?
Yeah, you are betting on him being healthy, and that is the big thing. If he can't play, and he does miss a lot of time, you're in trouble. And this year was weird. It was like a sickness that kind of went undiagnosed, or at least wasn't ever made public, and just kind of in and out of the lineup and was never fully 100%. So at least it's not a knee or a shoulder or a foot or something like that. And then I think the idea of playing Trae Young and Kristaps Porzingis, at least in a pick and roll, it's a lot of spacing. Those are 2 of the best shooters in the NBA, and there's value. And we saw how Quinn Snyder was able to utilize shooting with the Jazz. So I think that's the value there. And then again, what did they give up? George Niang in a second-round pick? That's nothing. So you are buying him for pennies, but no question it's a swing. It's not really an obvious upgrade on the roster as far as a guy you're going to be able to count on to make an all-star team and push you to the finals. But I think they recognize this is pretty low cost. Why not try it?
I wanted to get your thoughts on the Kevin Durant trade. That seems to be most impactful as far as what it could mean in the race for an NBA championship in the league. Does that really swing the Rockets from a team that was really good last year but lost in the first round to a team that could contend for a title?
I do like teaming Kevin Durant with Ime Udoka, who I just look at some of the coaches that Kevin Durant has played for since he left the Golden State Warriors. And like Steve Nash in Brooklyn. It's been just a revolving door in Phoenix. It's just been kind of a mess. So I do think getting into a serious location with a serious coach like Ime Udoka can be beneficial because, Kevin Durant's uber talented. And I don't care that he's 37. Obviously, that's a big mark, and he's not going to get better at this point. But I do think putting him in a spot where it doesn't have to be looked for any leadership skills because I think that's been his biggest weakness throughout his career. I don't think he's a guy you can turn to and expect him to bring a clubhouse together, bring the locker room together, get everyone on the same page.
Right.
He's just kind of noisy. There's always noise around his team. So I actually think going to a place like Houston where it seems like they've been able to eliminate some of that and get a bucket getter and get a scorer with that excellent defense they have. It's one of the best in the NBA. I think it's intriguing. I don't know if it pushes them above the best teams in the NBA, but teams are thinking that these doors are open and you're, an injury away from an opposing team to have a chance to win a title. And I think that's what they're going for.
As you look at the draft now, I'm looking at mock drafts. I'm watching reports, Ben, and it's just everything from 3 to 10 is all over the place. It's crazy, a draft with this much talent. There's not a consensus on who the guys are there. What do you make of that, and how much drama do you think that's going to create on draft night?
Yeah, I really think every team in that range is going to go in not knowing what anyone else's board looks like. And I think that makes it really difficult. So, maybe somebody jumps from 6 to 4 or 7 to 4 to get somebody that was just going to be on the board anyways, and they overpay for it. I think there's going to be some danger for that. And then because teams are afraid of doing that, they might just stand pat and just say, look, this tier from whether you think it's 4 beginning with Con Knipple or Trey Johnson or even 3 with VJ Edgecombe, that will include, Ace Bailey, that'll include Jeremiah Fears, that'll include Common Malawash, that might include even another dark horse player we haven't talked about. They might just say, we'll just take whoever falls, and there's no reason to put more assets into it because, truthfully, all of these guys are 19 or 20 years old. Or even some of them even 18. They have real strengths. They've got some weaknesses that are a little scary that you recognize why they may not turn into stars or even really good NBA players. And so you just say, look, it's going to be a guess. It's going to be a bit of a coin toss on all of these guys, and you're just going to see who ends up on the board when you're on the clock.
Man, so before the draft happens, I still we just had a couple big trades today. What do you foresee kind of happening here? Jazz have been rumored to be in the mix on a lot of things. What kind of things can happen here? Kristaps Porzingis' move, CJ McCollum moved, Jordan Poole moved. There's a couple. Drew Holiday, as we said, it moved. What other things can happen or potential to happen before tomorrow night?
Yeah, I think it is interesting because clearly some of these teams, some of the big names have already been moved. Kevin Durant is off the board. He's not going anywhere now. Drew Holiday was a name everyone knew was going to get traded. Kristaps was a name people thought was going to get traded. So some of these big dominoes have already fallen, and there's others out there, and that's where it gets interesting with the Jazz, whether it's Lauri Markkanen or John Collins or Colin Sexton. That gets interesting. But what I'd also remind everyone is that, Danny Ainge is comfortable, and now Austin Ainge. Danny historically made trades into September, right up to the training camp. So the Jazz may be willing to just sit and kind of wait this out now that Austin Ainge is the guy too, and just say, hey, we're going to let teams get closer to camp, see what they need to add, see if the landscape dries up a little bit, and then maybe it raises the price of some of these guys. Is that exactly what the Jazz want to do? Probably not. I bet they'd like to have some of their business done earlier in the year, but I don't think they're intimidated by the idea that there's a ticking clock, even though that's when most of the action happens on draft night.
Ace Bailey seems to be the most polarizing prospect in this draft, the biggest boom bust, the biggest mystery, and a lot of that's been created by their own camp, unfortunately. But what do you make of all that? Is there smoke to the fire, or is this one of those things where it's lying season? I don't know. What do you make of the situation with Ace Bailey, and could the Jazz look past all of that and still select him at 5?
So Ace's agent is the dad of a kid named Sharif Cooper, who also was drafted a couple of years ago and ended up falling to the second round and was super talented. And I think he went to Atlanta, and it was just kind of a mess. And even then, with a much lower level draft pick, and it was his son, he just you could tell he mishandled it. And I remember talking to draft people and being like, oh, the problem with him is you got to deal with his dad. And that's tough, and that's really difficult because he was just a little cloying. And I think Ace is suffering from some of that as well. Now, the difference is Ace is a much better player than Cooper was, and so I think there's the advantage there. So I think that's where most of it is. I just think he has an inexperienced agent who is trying to, get every dollar he can out of this kid, which is really unfortunate. And look, that's tricky because that can ruin players' careers. That can become really difficult for a front office to deal with. With that said, though, at the top of a draft, if you think a guy is good enough, I just think you draft him. I don't think it really matters if you've worked out, if he's come to Salt Lake. You've talked to him. Again, it's important to remember Ace Bailey's been on NBA radar since he was 15 years old, because at that point he was probably 6'6" and maybe only 135 pounds, but was already the best player amongst all the sophomores in school. If he was, maybe it was Cooper flag, but Ace was number 2. And then same with his junior year and senior year and AAU, and goes to the NBA goes to Rutgers, and everyone, even through his weird season, kind of said, yeah, but he's still going to be the 3rd best player in this draft, and then you should still probably take him there. So for this to change dramatically in the last week, I think is probably false. I do think there's a lot of smoke there and maybe not a lot of fire. So that's what I would certainly be cautious of if you're buying into the idea that, he's going to slip to 8. Now, maybe he can. We saw Cam Whitmore fall a couple of years ago all the way down to number 20. I have a hard time thinking that's going to happen with Ace.
Is that something that they're trying to manipulate to do? Is there a specific team, if you heard, is there a specific team Ace would rather go to? I'd like to slip past, 76ers. I'd like to slip past, Utah or whatever. Is there a team that he's kind of eyeing and why possibly they're causing so much controversy?
Yeah, the names seem to be Washington at 6 and Brooklyn at 8. I mean, that kind of seems to match, it's an East Coast thing. Remember, he played in New Jersey, he went to Rutgers, so he's in that area. It's not where he grew up necessarily, but he's in that area. He grew up in Georgia. There, he has those are big cities. So if you want to go play in Washington, D.C., it's a bigger city. It's not a great NBA city, but it's a bigger city. And certainly Brooklyn's a very big city. It's, it's not New York City, but it's big, and it's an East Coast city if that's what he's preferring. And, some of it may be strategic of just saying, I'm not going to be the guy in Philadelphia, and I would like to be, and I'm not going to get that opportunity to grow because they want to win now, and I'm not ready to help a team win. And honestly, you may just want to avoid Charlotte because Charlotte's been a mess for a while. So
for a while.
It could be as simple as that. So I think that's what I would maybe read into that if I had to guess where his camp wanted him to land. I would think Washington and Brooklyn probably make the most sense.
Well, somebody's got 5 first-round picks that they can make a name for himself in there.
They can certainly try to make a push if they want him. Another player that's rising, and I'll give you credit, you were on him early, and I was like, Con Knipple at 5 to the Jazz seems really high, but now there's word he could go even higher. What has happened that's caused his draft stock to rise so rapidly during the process?
Yeah, I do think we kind of go back on some of these guys after the draft, and you start to look closer at even like, Jeremiah Fears or Ace Bailey here, and you start to just say, okay, it's a little bit more of a 50-50 bet than we had thought. Maybe they bust or maybe they don't bust. And then you think like, well, is there a guy who we feel better about not busting? And then you start looking at like what the skills are. It's like, well, are you a very consistent shooter? Have you always been a good shooter? Can you do some of the other things, whether that's, passing, a little bit of defense, good team player? No personality issues. You're not dealing with the goofy agent like you're dealing with Ace Bailey. Good size. You start to kind of weigh those things, and it's just like Con Knipple's just like good at everything. He's just like, I don't know if he's a 10 shooter. Don't get me wrong. He's like an elite shooter. He does have an elite skill. He just processes the game at a high level, though. So where some of these other guys, Jeremiah Fears is 6'2" and doesn't shoot particularly well. Ace Bailey, wants to be a superstar, and there's questions if he's going to buy in if he's not a superstar. Trey Johnson doesn't play any defense at all. You just kind of start to, hit those guys with their weaknesses, and then you go to Con Knipple, and he's a little bit of Teflon. There's just like not a lot of things you can nitpick other than, well, maybe he's not a superstar. Maybe he doesn't have the physical tools to be the best player in the NBA, where if everything went right for Ace Bailey, he could be, a top 20 player, a top 15 player. And I think that's where a guy like Con Knipple just steadily rises in draft circles throughout the process. And look, he may still fall to 8, and that's probably where he was projected for most of the year after a hot start at Duke. But I do think that's why if you end up hearing his name called, I mean, honestly, even as high as 3, maybe 4 with Charlotte, and then certainly I think he comes into play with the Jazz at 5, you shouldn't be surprised.
Would you be surprised if the Jazz either moved up or moved back in this draft?
No, it's the Angels, and they like to move, and if they feel like there's more assets they can get, and maybe they've exhausted some of their assets over the last 2 years, making 6 draft picks in the top 32 each of the 2 years, and feeling like, there just hasn't been the guy, and we want to take a couple more swings. Now, again, they have the 21st pick. How many 20-year-olds do you want to have on your roster? I think becomes a very real question here, but yeah, I think, if Brooklyn wants to move some of these picks and the Jazz say, we know the guy we actually like is going to be there at 8. I mentioned a dark horse. Let's say there's a guy, Kasparas Yakashonis at Illinois, who the Jazz love. And they say, I know the top 7 guys in the draft are going to go. And sitting there at 8, we can get the guy we actually want. It's probably too rich to spend the 5th pick on him, which I think is goofy thinking. But you can get 2 more assets for it. Maybe you do that. So I do think that's interesting. And then, one of the things is we've talked about Kristaps Porzingis. It's like, well, who else was looking at Kristaps? Was Philly saying, hey, maybe we could trade Paul George for Kristaps Porzingis and try and, get some money and change picks and move from, 5 to 3 or whatever, the same way they're talking about with the Jazz with Lauri Markkanen. Now that Kristaps is off the board, does a team like Philly more seriously look at that Jazz offer and say, well, maybe we'll fall back to 5 and give you 3 and Paul George and then maybe something else, or, so I think that landscape does constantly change, and it's difficult to project, how exactly they move up, or maybe the Jazz just go from 5 to 4. I wouldn't bet on that, but if they feel like, hey, the guy that we really want's on the board at 4, we think someone else is trying to trade up for him, whether that's Brooklyn or whether that's Washington, let's just go get him. They certainly have the ammunition to do that as well.
The Jazz also have the number 21 pick in the first round tomorrow night. You've got a write-up. You've done a lot of work on this, and you've got a list of guys that you think are good looks that at number 21. And look, I mean, we can't overlook late first-round picks because we saw what happened last year. The Jazz did pretty well late in the first round and early in the second round, so this is not to be overlooked. What kind of names and who are some of the talent that they're looking at that number 21 pick? It's obviously hard to narrow it down too much because there's so much that can happen before that.
Yeah, I would look at maybe somebody older. Again, we talked about, you've already got 6 players who are going to be 21 and younger on this roster, plus whoever you take at 5, and they're not taking an older guy there. So maybe you go with a more experienced player who doesn't need to have his hand held and just adjust to being a grown-up once they get to Utah. And 2 names I would really look at there is Walter Clayton, who is the point guard for Florida, who just won the championship. He's honestly the type of guy who could step in and just win one of the backcourt spots for the Jazz right away. And yeah, maybe it pushes like a Keontae George down the line a little bit, or pushes somebody out, or they move on from Colin Sexton and he steps in and plays some of that role. But I think by the middle of his rookie season, he might be ready to do that. And then still has some upside. We kind of sell some of these older guards short. And it's they end up being really valuable. Jalen Brunson fell to the second round. Fred VanVleet was undrafted. Some of these guys still have a lot of value. And a name I really like is Maxime Reynaud. He was the center at Stanford this year. He's 7 feet tall and he shoots threes. And kind of my tagline all year last year was, don't overthink Kyle Filipowski. Just don't overthink it. Don't nitpick him too much. He's 7 feet tall. He's really smart. He just kind of does a lot of things well. Maxime Reynaud is 7 feet tall. He's very athletic, and he shoots threes at a 35% rate. It's just you can nitpick. Yeah, he's got a short wingspan. You can nitpick he's a little bit older. Yeah, he didn't go to a traditional basketball school. But the things he does matter in the NBA. So I think those types of guys, maybe a Rasheer Fleming, who's also older, do make sense for the Jazz at 21.
It's Ben Anderson, our Utah Jazz insider, and of course the co-host of Jake and Ben right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Ben and Jake will be hosting our NBA draft coverage starting at 6 p.m. tomorrow night from the Cage. Go book your cage right now. Go book your cage at 2688 South Redwood Road, Suite C. We're going to all be there from 3 to 10 p.m., but Jake and Ben will be giving you, with Steve Cleveland, former BYU head coach, the best coverage you can get during the draft. It's going to be a lot of fun. Ben, look forward to it tomorrow night. Your work is awesome. You can go read all of his work on KSLSports.com. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys.
Ben Anderson, he's the best. Great stuff. A lot of good insight there. And he'll be all over it tomorrow night throughout the evening during the draft.